Cada dia posso ver, perceber em seu olhar, as pessoas tão vazias, cheias de pesar, vivem cada vez mais sós, morrem sem amor. Um sorriso esconde a dor, só Jesus o vê. Busquem a Jesus, busquem a Jesus. Quando o sonho se desfaz, Ele dá sua paz. Busquem a Jesus, busquem a Jesus. É preciso entender, Cristo traz sua paz. Sua luz Jesus me dá, e Ele espera que eu vá ajudar a quem quiser nova vida encontrar, e a todo que vier muita paz buscar. Novo sol irá brilhar, trevas nunca mais. Busquem a Jesus, busquem a Jesus. Quando o sonho se desfaz, Ele dá sua paz. Busquem a Jesus, busquem a Jesus. É preciso entender, é preciso aceitar que Cristo traz a paz. Cristo traz a paz. Amém.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. We are recording the last Sunday school class, so that the friends that could not attend to the church class, and we had some problems on the online transmission. So I'm recording this class so that you guys can follow up with us and continue next week. Okay? Just going back to what we have seen in the first class with you guys, some of the last slides that we had. We mentioned that spiritually speaking, we Christians are the true Hebrews, the true Jews, and the true Israel of God in our days. Remember that we mentioned that. So, at that time, it's important to understand the context. The context was that what was going on at the time of after Jesus' death and resurrection. There was a big persecution over the Christians. So many of them were kind of discouraged. They were not sure if they had made the right decision to follow Jesus, because Jesus taught them that the Jewish religion was no longer served God's purpose. And also he taught that the temple was going to be destroyed. And after that, some years after Jesus' death and resurrection, the temple uh, was still there, and the Jewish religion was still functioning. So the people were kind of discouraged, trying to understand if we were on the right direction, if they took the right decision also. So with the increasing of the persecution, some of the Jewish Christians became discouraged. They began to doubt about whether Christianity really was God's new and victorious way to the eternal kingdom. They were not sure about the decision they took. So some of them had stopped attending Christian meetings and were even giving up their Christian faith and going back to Judaism. So for whom the book was of Hebrew was written? The letter of Hebrew was written to reassure the Christians, the Jewish Christians, believers, and prevent them from slipping back to their former religious practices. So many times, uh, it's important for us to understand the context in the time where the letter of Hebrews was written. The book of Hebrew was written. It's important to understand the context. There was a very big persecution. Christians were being killed, were being they were being dead in the cross, an upside down cross, as you could see the slide previous slide, and they were not sure if they did the right decision. So the book was written to reassure that these believers they took the right decision, and they could not slip back to the former religious. So what we are going to look today's class. Many in our days, many people think the book of Hebrew, the letter to the Hebrews, are very hard and not easy to understand because it mentions a lot of these religious practices from the Old Testament. It mentions many topics, many verses, many phrases related to the old practices. And in our days, it's hard to understand. So what we're gonna do here is walk a little bit deeper on these practices so that we can remember, and this is going to be the path to read and understand better the book of Hebrew. So what we're gonna see today, we're gonna focus on some of these Old Testament religious practices. Okay, we're gonna focus on that so that will help us when we start reading the book together, studying the book together. That will help us because we're gonna have already covered this overview on these old religious practices. Okay, so we're gonna start understanding the old covenant. How did this happen, and what was the old covenant? Covenant between whom? That's what we are going to understand on this next few slides, okay? So God in his grace, he has chosen a people to belong to him. And this people was Israel. So what did these people did to deserve such a favor, to deserve such a blessing from God. They did nothing. They did nothing. This was just God's grace, pure divine grace. So it's important to understand what is a covenant between God and the people. So normally a covenant between two people, they are agreement between these people, and they have obligations, benefits, and penalties. That's what it happens between two people. But what is a covenant between God and a human and the people that God's selected, elected to be His people? And there's only one condition on this kind of covenant between God and a human, a people, some people. There's only one condition. The condition is that the people should follow God's will. They needed to do God's will. That's the main condition on a covenant between God and a person. So it's not easy to follow uh, God's condition, God's will. It's not easy to follow. But this was the only condition for the people. And there are some aspects about a covenant that we want to share with you guys. So, especially talking about the covenant with God, between God and a person. Can us, mere humans, can we negotiate with God? Can we put conditions on this agreement? Okay, God, I will make a covenant with you, but I have these and these and these conditions. I want to still continue doing that. I want to still continue uh, not attending to this will that you want me to attend to follow. Can we negotiate with God? Can we negotiate an agreement, putting conditions with God? Of course, no. So the covenant between God and the people, it's different from a everyday covenant. God is always the giver, and the people is always the receivers. God is love. God is it's has His love for all the people. So He doesn't want nothing back. He doesn't need nothing back. He just wants to give us blessings and blessings and blessings. And God's promises originated in His on His grace, and the people of His creation could do nothing but just accept His favor and submit to His direction. So the people didn't have to do nothing, just follow God's will and submit to His directions. We can see that in Genesis, and there's a very beautiful message on the Bible that says that God talks to the people, and it says, "I will keep my covenant between me and you and your future offsprings throughout their generations, as an everlasting covenant to be God and God of your offspring after you." So God has a promise to the people that he will be together with His people forever. And that's amazing and that's wonderful for us believers in our day. But also understanding the covenant, the old covenant. What do you guys think about? Was this covenant to be permanent? When God established this covenant with the people, with His people, what were God's plans for that? Did He intend it to be permanent, And let's understand the answer for this question. Okay, let's understand the answer for this question. So, by saying a new covenant, he has declared that the first is old, and what is old and aging is about to disappear. This is mentioned in the book of Hebrew, in the letter to the Hebrews. So, it's saying that the new covenant. So now we understand there is an old and there is a new covenant. And we have to understand what are these two covenants, the old and the new. Well, the old covenant we already have seen that was something that happened in the Old Testament. We're going to understand when did it happen and with who. But it was not permanent because there was a new covenant that happened at the time, a little bit before, at the time that the book, the letter to the Hebrews was written. So the big difference between these two covenants are the old covenant was based on the law, in the law, and the new covenant was based on God's grace. And as you can see in the slide, there's a cross here, and this cross is Jesus Christ. So we can understand, think about it, if it makes sense what I'm going to say now. We can understand that the old covenant was a preparation to Jesus, to the coming of Jesus. Because the old covenant had law, the law with all the practices that should be followed by the people. And these practices was preparing the people to reach the the coming of Jesus. So we can see that on the Bible, in the Bible. So if we want to intend to be permanent, what then was its purpose? Why the old covenant shouldn't be permanent? And what was the purpose of that? We understand that the purpose of the old covenant was to prepare the way to Jesus. That's what I just said. The writer of Hebrew wants to show uh, that once Christ came, the old covenant was no further had no further use. His death on the cross did what all Israel's laws and ceremonies could not do. It brought cleansing from sin and the right to enter God's presence. So, the old covenant could not clean sins and permit people to enter in God's presence. This was, as we're gonna see in the next few slides, only a small group of people could go into God's presence. We're gonna see how this happened. And also, there was no cleansing for the sins. And that brings us to another question, very interesting question that many times I asked myself, if the old covenant could not bring cleansing, how are people under the covenant saved? This is something to think. But it's easy to understand the answer. They were saved by God's grace. They had faith in God, and God's grace go over the people that had faith on him. That was the only way to sinners at the time being saved. It was God's grace. The people just had one thing to do, had faith in God. With that, they were saved. No one could be saved could be saved by keeping the law, just keeping the law. They had to have faith in God. Abraham lived before the old covenant was established, whereas David lived under the old covenant. But both were saved on the same way, by faith. We can see that in the book of Romans. So if this question comes up, it's easy to answer. God's grace could save everyone that had faith on him. So salvation under the old covenant is not a big deal anymore. It's easy to understand. Just a few texts from the Bible that can that show us, that ensure us about that. For no one will be justified on his sight, but the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. So the law was important to give knowledge to the people that they were doing wrong things. They were sinners. But also was important to understand that the works of the law was not enough to save anyone. So we can understand this on these texts from the Bible. For you are saved by grace through faith, and this is not from yourself, it is God's gift. We can see in Ephesians. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him for righteousness. So, Abraham, he only believed in God. And as we have seen on this slide, I'm gonna go back a little bit here just to refresh our minds. Remember this? Abraham was a descendant from Noah, and one of Noah's sons, Shem, he was a monotheist. So Abraham was descendant from Shem, and he was a monotheist. He believed in God, and just because he believed in God, Abraham was saved. So going ahead on the religious practices, we're gonna dive deep here on the tabernacle. And why is this important to understand? As I mentioned before, in the letter to the Hebrews, many of the old religious practices are mentioned, and sometimes it's not easy to understand what the writer wants to say, and that's why I choose to make a very quick overview on these Old Testament religious practices. And we're going to start by the tabernacle to understand what was the tabernacle and what was made of and how things happen in the tabernacle so that you guys can uh, remember this, okay? So, the Hebrews were wandering in the wilderness, and God commanded them to build a portable dwelling place for the divine presence from the time of the Exodus. So, God told them, okay, build uh, a, a temple that could be uh, that you guys could take along the journey, and this temple is gonna be as a sanctuary to me for me, so that I may dwell among them, among the people that were together with Moses and were walking on the desert. So we can imagine what a powerful message nowadays this was. It's like God saying, "You are pilgrims on this land. Egypt is past, Canaan is future. But do not fear, I'll be with you in the journey." And this is always something important to bring to nowadays. God is always with us. God is always taking care of us because we are God's Israel in nowadays. So he's looking at us. He's taking care of at us. This is a very powerful message for today. We can be sure that we are not alone. We are not walking alone. So, continuing on the tabernacle details. So the tabernacle not only symbolized God's presence among the Hebrews, but it was also the place for the religious duties of Israel. You know, in the tabernacle, where the was the place where the Jews could practice their religious duties. So it was a kind of a mobile temple. They could take, they could build and unbuild in a matter of hours, and they could take this all the way to their journey. So the structure was a simple design so that it could be easily put together, taken apart, and transported. That's what I mentioned. So how was the tabernacle? It was a big tent. We can, to make it simple, just to remember and understand, it was a big tent. You know, a tent over a big box, and under this tent there was a big wooden box. And this wooden box had two rooms, and we're gonna understand specifically these two rooms, what had inside these two rooms, and how the people could use this, how this should be used. So, simply described, it consists of a wooden box like frame covered with clothes and protected from the weather by a tent that covered the whole. All the people saw the outside was a tent. They could only see a tent, okay? Inside this main room that we call the holy place. The holy place is this first room. This is the main entrance, okay, of of the tabernacle. This is the main entrance of the tent. And the first room had a seven-headed lampstand. We call the monera. Also, there was the table of the sacred bread, the table here, and also the incense burning, the burning for the place, the altar for burning incense, as you can see here. So this room was a very specific room, and only the priest could reach this room. And this was a place where the preach uh, uh, could talk with God, the prayings, and this was the place where that happened. Okay, this first room. But there was a second room. Let's go back here. There was a second room, and this was a very important room, the most important room on the tabernacle. This was the Holy of the Holies. It was called the Holy of the Holies. So a second curtain separated the holy place from the smaller rear room, which was known as the most holy place or Holy of the Holies. In this place, in this room, small room, uh, we could we could find the Ark of the Covenant. This was a symbolic place for the presence of God. On this small room, it was the symbolic place of the presence of God. So this room could only be accessed once a year. Once a year. One specific day in a year, the priest could go inside the room. And this was known as the Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. The Jews called the Yom Kippur. And now in our days we still have this specific date on Jews calendar. It's the most holiest day in the year for the Jewish people. Okay? And we're gonna see some details about the ark and this room. Okay? Moving ahead. Just taking an overview of the tabernacle, you guys can see there's a big fence surrounding the tabernacle, and all the tents from the people were around the tabernacle, so that the tabernacle could be in the center of the big camp, and also to protect the treasures and the things that the tabernacle contained. Okay, so from the outside, the people could only see the tent because there was a big fence here, but they knew exactly what happened inside, because this was related to a religious practice at the time. Okay, so just going back to the ark. The ark was the the most important symbolic object of the tabernacle. As I said before, it represents the presence of God. Inside the ark, there were the 10 tablets, the 10 commandments that God sent it to Moses. And I also mentioned in our prison class, no one could touch the ark. And we can see in the book, in the Bible, that people that try to touch the ark, even though by mistake, they drop dead. So the way to carry the ark was using these two sticks that people could lift the ark and carry without touching. And these two cherubims, they were called the Shekinah, which means the presence of God. So the ark was a symbolic way to refer to the presence of God in the tabernacle. And that's what God promised the people, to be together with them uh, on a daily basis. So just to refresh and give an overview of the tabernacle, you guys can see details on it if you want to study and look for it, more details. What was inside the tabernacle, as you can see here, the altar. There's an altar to the ceremonies, to the sacrifices, where the priests bring food and animals to the sacrifices. There was also a laver so that the priests could wash themselves to preparing to the, 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 the burning of sacrifices. So you guys can dive deep here and take a look on some details. Okay? Well, for today, guys, uh, this is what we have planned. We will continue on the old religions practices of the Old Testament, and as I said, preparing to the book of Hebrew so that we can understand easier and study on the book of Hebrew. So, guys, thanks for watching. Hope this find you guys well, and hope to see you guys next week in the presence class and also in the online. As I mentioned, we had some problems in the online transmission last Sunday. I hope for this Sunday everything is okay and working fine. Okay, we had a problem in the church internet, but I believe for this Sunday everything is gonna be okay. And I'll share you guys with all the material. Thanks for watching once again, and have a good day. Bye bye.